Oh howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today I wanted to recap the mechanics of the Kalandra expansion, and this is being put out because of the Blast from the Past event that's going to be starting when this video is a couple of days old. Now there is one thing that I want to get out of the way first, and this is a very important nerf to something that was a key mechanic in patch 3.19 itself. This took place in patch 3.20, and negative conversion builds are dead even in standard. Negative conversion builds that were popular during patch 3.19 will not work in the Blast from the Past event. Now, you only need to know about this if you did play during 3.19 and you remember the negative conversion shenanigans. If you don't remember them, then it's just an interesting part of PathOfExile history, but it's not something that will be important here. This is the line from the 3.20 patch notes that killed this interaction off. Fixed a bug where having negative values of damage conversion would grant extra damage of the initial damage type. But if the stat your physical damage is converted to lightning falls below 0, this is now just treated as being the same as 0. It is no longer going to cause you to get incredible amounts of extra damage. So if you're looking at build guides from patch 3.19, keep this one in mind. Some of those shenanigans won't work anymore. Anyways, with that important disclaimer out of the way, let's talk quickly about the Kalandra mechanic itself. So Kalandra was a hot mess of a league start that got better over time. Most of the player base remembers Kalandra as being a complete failure of a league, one that they quit quickly, and also one where the league mechanic granted very little loot. There's a couple of reasons people have this perception that it granted very little loot. It didn't grant as much early on as it did later, but the main thing was that the mechanic was counterintuitive in a few ways. And if you played it with a mindset of, I'm going to optimize my Lakes of Kalandra the way that I would optimize a map, for example, I want to try and get as many types of additional league content on as possible, then you'll end up disappointed. Because in the Lake of Kalandra, mechanics like Delirium, mechanics like Harbinger, these are just much worse than they are in the base game. Rewards in the Lake of Kalandra mostly come from killing reflections of map bosses. We'll get to the reflection of Tyranny later, but this is the meat and potatoes of a decent Lake of Kalandra encounter. It took players a long time to figure this out, and by the time they had, most of the player base had quit the league. This meant that people remember the lake as having less loot than it actually had. The loot was there, it's just that you were looking for it in the wrong place, and you were often removing the tiles that gave loot and choosing to put in tiles like breach tiles that gave very little of it instead. So let's talk quickly about the tablet mechanic. Those of you with a bit of experience with the incursion mechanic will have a sense of how you can build up a special event, something that's not a map but is vaguely similar to a map, over several maps that you run. Now each zone that you encounter in the game will have a Kalandra interactable tablet, and each of these tablets will let you make at least 2 and sometimes more modifications to your current mirrored tablet. Once your mirrored tablet is finished, you'll then be able to itemize it, kind of like the way that you can itemize an Elva temple, and then you'll be able to run it at your leisure or trade it to other players. Now you want to ignore these during the axe. During the axe, the mirrored tablets will be too small to be useful, and as a result, I don't recommend that you start them even in Act 10 when they start getting better. Instead, start doing them when you get to Tier 1 maps. At that point, you'll be able to do some mandatory unlocks that we'll get to later, and you'll end up being able to make your tablets quite a bit better. What your goal is with the lake is to make a fully connected, long, windy, and linear path. The smaller the number of times that your path branches, the better, and in particular, the longer it takes to walk from the entrance tile, which is the one that you see here, to other tiles, the better. So you can see here the entrance tile is a distance of 1 away from this tile and this tile, 2 away from this tile, this tile, this tile, and this tile, 3 from this tile and this tile, and 4 from this tile. There is nothing that is 5 or further away from the origin here. A much better tablet would exist if you were to swap this empty water zone for this tile here. And that's actually an option that you're able to pick sometimes when you're able to make a move to modify your tablet. When you do this, the distances to each tile will be 1 to here, 2 to these two, 3 to here, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And that's because you've cut off this path. Remember, only horizontal and vertical tiles are considered adjacent. Diagonal tiles are not considered to be adjacent at all. Zones further from the origin will be harder and they will be more rewarding. And this is measured by this walking distance. Once you reach difficulty 5, i.e. a distance of 5 from the entrance point, you'll start getting much better chests than you'll get in difficulties 1, 2, 3, and 4. This will continue to improve as you get to difficulties 6 through 16. 16 is the highest you can possibly get on a mirrored tablet, but the improvement becomes smaller each time. Now let's start by looking at a full tablet that is particularly bad. This one here has no tiles that are a difficulty higher than 4. This one is the furthest from the origin, 1, 2, 3, 4, whereas these ones are 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2. You may also notice that the reflection of Tyranny node that's highlighted here, which is the one in the top left corner, has 4 little notches on the corner of it, as well as this image of frost. The frost tells you which flavor that you've got here, so this is cold related monsters. For non-league mechanic tiles, the more notches that you've got, the stronger the bias will be towards the chest that you get for completing the node, containing uncommon and good reward types like scarabs. With fewer notches, it's more common to see undesirable reward types like armor instead. Now this is a terrible layout. What you want is no branching paths, and you want the entrance not to be in the middle, you want it to be on the edge and ideally in one of the corners, and you want something that's a long snaky layout that winds around rather than something that has a whole bunch of pieces that meet together in the middle. So always remember, more notches is a bias towards rarer and better loot types. The further you get from the entrance, the higher the quality of loot, and the Kalandra exclusive items, if you're lucky enough to get one, which is going to be RNG, are going to be better. Now there are also 2 very rare tiles you should watch out for. The first one is Reflection of Paradise. Now this one is rare but not staggeringly rare. This one is basically an untainted paradise in a can. It will give you a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous amount of experience when you do it. Then there is the Ethereal Reflecting Mist, which is called Reflection of Kalandra, which is much rarer again. Probably an order of magnitude rarer than the Reflection of Paradise. I'm going to talk more about that thing later, but essentially it is this league's equivalent of something like a Hinakora's Lock, i.e. a super, super extreme endgame crafting option. Now this tablet that you see here is a work in progress. There is an uncommon, and when I say uncommon, I don't mean rare, I genuinely mean this is just uncommon, option that you'll get that will swap the entrance tile with an empty tile on your grid. Now using this to move the entrance to the bottom middle or the bottom left would create a 12 length path, and this should be your goal here. Tablets in red tier maps have about a 50% chance to roll as 4x5 and a 50% chance to roll as 5x5. The latter is far superior, as it can allow paths of up to length 16 if you can get a perfect layout on your 5x5 tile set. A difficulty 16 Reflection of Kalandra with an Ethereal Reflecting Mist is the most valuable thing that you can get on a mirrored tablet, and it wouldn't surprise me if people who are motivated by standard progress and creating potentially irreplaceable items for standard will be happy to give you an Apothecary Divination card for one of these level 16 Ethereal Reflecting Mist tiles if you're able to make one. Now, below the Reflection of Chaos text here, you'll see that there are 3 little buttons. These are special unlocks you can get that improve your tablets by a lot. The first one is Reroll, the second one is Skip, and the third one is Exile, which players generally refer to as Ban. The third one allows you to ban a tile. This prevents it from rolling again on any of the future times that you modify your existing tablet. This is incredibly, incredibly strong. You should always use these upon any of the 5 different tiles that say defeat packs of monsters. In this case, Reflection of the Storm, Reflection of Chaos. These are both quite bad. You should just instantly ban both of them. It's not that these tiles are terrible. It's just that they are mediocre and they are common. And removing 3 of these common tiles is a huge upgrade, as it's something that will allow you to roll the rarer things more frequently. Not all of the rarer options are better, but some of them are, and some of them are much, much, much better. As well as that, it will mean that you almost always have something that involves map bosses, which tend to be much better tiles than the ones that just say defeat packs. The other 2 buttons re-roll your options. Every time you encounter a Kalandra in-map event, you'll get a limited number of uses of the mirrored tablet. This will be at least 2, and I believe you can get 3 or 4 from recollection as well, although again, I've just got to confirm that when we get back into the league mechanic. The re-roll option does not consume one of these uses, and the second one, which is called Skip, does consume one of your turns. But either way, it'll re-roll your options on the right-hand side to give you 3 new choices. One thing that's important to know, if you've got no good options, then what you can do is just swap around 2 reflections, especially if they're 2 you don't care very much about. For example, if I was facing this board, what I would do is I would Exile Reflection of Chaos and Exile Reflection of the Storm. I will then have no more Exiles left, and I'm going to get absolutely no more while I'm working on this tablet. Then I'm only going to have one option left, which is swap a reflection with another reflection, and I'm going to use that to just transpose this tile and this tile, which is a nothing move. This essentially wastes a move, but it doesn't do any damage to my tablet either. And once you've played one of these tiles, exiling them doesn't count, but doing pretty much anything else with them does, you'll be presented with 3 new options that you can then use on your next interaction with that mirrored tablet. So what's your first priority? You want to beeline for unlocking all 3 of these bans/exiles. This will be a significant more multiplier to the amount of good options you're offered in map Kalandra events. The first ban comes from doing any tile at difficulty 8+. Generally speaking, it's pretty hard to make a difficulty 8+ tablet until you are at least on a 4x4, and so that's one of the reasons that I say don't do this mechanic until like at least Act 10, but probably until maps. Ban number 2 comes from doing a Legion tile specifically at difficulty 8+. And ban number 3 comes from doing a Beyond tile at difficulty 10+. To get difficulty 10+, I believe it absolutely requires you're on a minimum of a 4x5 tablet, but a 5x5 will be easier to get difficulty 10 on. Beyond is not a particularly common tile, and this is a really important unlock to get. Don't underestimate these monsters either. Difficulty 10 will add a lot of monster stats, and Beyond monsters are just intrinsically very strong. You're going to need to full clear this tile, so you want to be careful, and if you need to be slow and methodical about it, then do be slow and methodical about it. Pull monsters away from the tile if you have to do that. Kill them in small clumps so that you don't get a large number of Beyond monsters spawning. In trade, I want to just advise you to buy this milestone. It's a Kalandra equivalent of getting another Voidstone, and it might take you 100 maps to hit Beyond 10 on a tablet. You should be able to pick up this tablet for 50 chaos or maybe 100 at most, and that is going to be better than going 100 maps without access to this third exile, because this third exile option is going to give you a lot of extra currency. Reroll and skip unlocks are worth doing, but they're less essential. The really important ones are the bans/exiles. A couple of important notes. There is an uncommon option you're going to get to convert a water tile into an empty tile. You'll get this a few times per lake that you run. Do not use this if you already have at least 13 non-water tiles on a 4x5 or at least 17 on a 5x5. You cannot undo this by any means, and your lake will become too crowded to avoid loops. You'll end up in a situation where you've got more tiles, but the tiles will on average be worse, and you won't be able to get maximal length paths of 12 or 16. Additionally, if you're in red maps where you can get both 4x5 and 5x5 tablets, very early in rolling, sometimes on a 4x5 tablet, you'll get the rare destroy this tablet option. If this pops up and you haven't got anything that makes your current tablet special in any way, then just use it. What you want to do then is try and get a 5x5 and start over with that, because the 5x5 tablets are just much better. It's a little bit different if you've already invested 15 moves into your 4x5. In that case, you probably just want to finish it off reasonably quickly and go and run it. Alright, let's talk about the Kalandra Exclusive Jewellery and Reflecting Mist. So these are the 2 major rewards that are Kalandra exclusive, and they are a big deal. There's 2 mechanics that offer jewelry with stat scale beyond normal limits, and I'm going to refer to these as the relatively common RNG Reflecting Mist and the extremely rare Ethereal Reflecting Mist. Ethereal Reflecting Mist does have a name in game, but the non-ethereal one doesn't have a name. I'm just going to be the one who calls it the RNG Mist. The numbers on items that are sourced from the RNG Mist will be higher, but the items will not have synergistic mods on them. So, RNG Reflecting Mist. Here's a couple of items that existed in the Kalandra League. Now, Death Scarab is an item that is listed for trade in Standard League at the moment, and it's pretty expensive, as you might be able to guess, even though it only has 1 positive mod on it. The other 3 mods are all negative. Corruption Choker is pretty underwhelming, but I think it's indicative of what you will normally get out of the RNG Reflecting Mist. Now, the RNG Reflecting Mist will spawn a random piece of jewelry and a reflected version of that jewelry. It seems to pop up about 1 in 10 tiles that you complete within the Lake of Kalandra. Sometimes you'll go an entire lake without getting one. Sometimes you'll get 3 of them in the same lake. You also have a small chance of getting 2 RNG Reflecting Mists at once as your reward for completing a particular tile. The way this works is that both of the different rings are rolled as though with a Chaos Orb, but they'll be the same as each other. Then numerical modifiers on each are scaled up by a lot. On a difficulty 13 tile, they'll be scaled up by a factor of 3, and Death Scarab is an example of one that came out of exactly a difficulty 13 tile. You could actually get slightly higher scaling again. Had Death Scarab come out of a difficulty 16 tile instead, then it would actually be worse. The negative 69% to damage over time multiplier might be negative 72% instead. Don't know the exact scaling that it works. What I do know is that it is 13, where plus 3 to the level of all skill gems becomes an option there. Now, some modifiers will be inverted on each of these items, and they will be polar opposites of each other. So when Death Scarab was pulled out of the Reflecting Mist, there would have been another copy of Death Scarab, and the other Death Scarab would have had plus 69% dot multi, plus 54% global critical strike chance, plus 60% maximum energy shield, and minus 3 to the level of all skill gems. So these two items would form a mirrored pair. It's my experience that the RNG Mist is trash about 95% of the time. A bit more than 4%, so maybe 4.5%, 4.75% of the time, you get something out of it that is somewhat solid, that you could see someone using for a while, but that probably isn't perfect for anyone. A good example of what you might expect here would be a ring that has plus 112 to one attribute, plus 97 to another attribute, minus 175 maximum life, and one other undesirable mod such as monsters attacking you deal 17 additional lightning damage. However, you can get absolutely god tier items out of the RNG Reflecting Mist on rare occasions. It was my experience during Lake of Kalandra expansion that I got 3 items that sold for a mirror shard each. And one of the items I sold, I probably could have got 5 to 6 times as much for, but I probably underpriced it at 1 mirror shard. It's like opening stacked decks. The average value is quite high, but the vast majority of the time that you pull something out of the RNG Reflecting Mist, it's going to be trash. But that's still actually a pretty high average value. Secondly, you can get some special bases out of the RNG Reflecting Mist. Now, this is quite rare, but you can get Kalandra Exclusive Bases here in the RNG Reflecting Mist, and even if the explicit mods on these are bad, they're actually quite good. And that's because you can vendor 5 penumbra rings that are all mirrored to get a rare penumbra ring back that is not mirrored, and as a result is craftable. It's one of those bases that not all that many people want, but the people who do want it, it is really, really important to them. And as a result, these end up being really good. There's 5 different versions of these bases, and they're all pretty rare. If you're in solo self-found, I don't think there's any real prospect of you being able to use the 5-for-1 recipe. This is something that's much more trade only. Whatever you do though, always take these, and don't vendor them for anything other than the 5-for-1 vendor recipe. Now, the Ethereal Reflecting Mist is the Jackpot. This allows you to pick which item to put into the mist, and so it can grant you items that have more synergistic modifiers. In exchange for this, 1, the Ethereal Reflecting Mist is very rare, and 2, the magnitude is smaller than it is on the RNG Reflecting Mist. For example, a difficulty 13 RNG Reflecting Mist is 3 times, whereas a difficulty 13 Ethereal Reflecting Mist is going to be 2.25 times. Now, the Ethereal Reflecting Mist both allows you to put in really powerful items, like something that's got +1 to the level of all skill gems and +1 to the level of all lightning skill gems, trying to get out of it something like Corruption Idol that you see here, which is a real item that someone's listed for trade in the Standard League. But there's also something else you can do, and that is that you can put in items that have mods that are not in the normal mod pool for items. So for example, you can put in an item that has Essence exclusive mods on it, or Delve exclusive mods, or a whole lot of other things. And there's a whole bunch of these that have niche uses both for their positive version and also for their negative version. Ethereal Reflecting Mist can also be used on fractured items, but it cannot be used on influenced items, cannot be used on corrupt items, cannot be used on items that are already reflected, cannot be used on synthesized items, and it cannot be used on items that have sockets on them. Now, generally you want to use this on items that have mods where the negative version can also be an asset. A good example of this is that minus 94% to lightning resistance is a bad mod for most builds. But if you're playing with Doriani's prototype, it's actually a really good mod to have on your character. Or at the very least, you want mods that are easy to ignore. Something like -2 frenzy charges is ideal here. Now, very important warning, before you start planning out your 10 planned uses for the Ethereal Reflecting Mist, you need to remember that this thing is extremely rare and extremely valuable. And in that sense, it is more akin to Hinakora's Lock rather than more common, more accessible crafting tools like the Corruption Chamber. This is not something you're likely to see yourself, and it's something you're likely to need to pay a king's ransom for in Trade League, especially if you want one of the high difficulty ones, one of the ones that can reflect with very high mod magnitudes. The Mist magnitude scales with the difficulty of the tile it's found on. Difficulty 4, it's times 1.8, and this rounds down. So for Corruption Idol, if this had been done in a difficulty 4 version of the Ethereal Reflecting Mist, there would only be +1 to the level of skill gems and lightning skill gems rather than +2. Each difficulty above 4 adds 0.05 to this multiplier, so 8 is a massive breakpoint where things become doubled. What about things specific to the Blast from the Past event? The Ethereal Reflecting Mist is going to be way better in Blast from the Past. In the actual Kalandra League, if you wanted to try and make those +2/+2 amulets, you weren't actually limited, you weren't throttled by access to the Ethereal Reflecting Mist. You're actually limited by Harvest, because Harvest was what governed the amount of +2 amulets that could be made. And this meant there was a little bit less demand for the Ethereal Reflecting Mist than there likely will be in Blast from the Past. In Blast from the Past, you've got access to Sentinels, which allow you to make extremely cheap inputs that are prepped and ready to go into the Ethereal Reflecting Mist. This means that people who are trying to make +4 amulets are going to be limited by access to the Ethereal Reflecting Mist, rather than being limited by access to +1/+1 amulets. Now, expect the rare tablets that have this mechanic to be even more precious than they were in Kalandra League, and they were plenty precious during Kalandra League. My 3.19 Kalandra strategy was pretty simple. I was buying lakes that other players had made that did not already have a premium tile on them. I'd pick a non-premium tile like Reflection of Tyranny, which is the 4-notch map boss tile, and I would search trade for difficulty 14 plus versions of that tile. When I found one, if it was being sold for 50 chaos or less, I'd just buy it, then I'd run that tablet. The direct drops of currency that you got would more than make up for the entrance fee, but the RNG Reflecting Mist gave me a few drops that were worth an appreciable fraction of a mirror, and also there were a number of other things you could get as well. Lastly, Kalandra goes well with fast mapping. You want to hit a lot of in-map Kalandra events per hour in order to maximize your use of this particular mechanic. You can sell your tablets in trade if you're uninterested in running them, or if your character performs poorly against the mechanics of the Kalandra expansion. Note that Sentinel also goes really well with fast mapping, and the mechanics match up really well. So hopefully that's been a useful little recap for those of you that played in Kalandra, or a bit of a heads up as to what to expect for those of you that didn't play Kalandra. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlobs and your Ethereal Reflecting Mist have interesting results.